It wasn't until the second spoonful that I noticed the sound was wrong. No clink, no metal against porcelain, just the soft scrape of silence. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth, and looked across the table. Merritt was eating his soup, slurping, actually, loudly, like he always did. His elbows were on the table. He still wore his old canvas jacket, the one with the broken zipper and the stitched-up cuff. Nothing was off about him, but the text was still on my phone, still open, still glowing in my peripheral vision like a neon accusation. Helping Dad with tax docs. Might be a while. Love you, honeybee. The bee emoji was new. She didn't used to use those. I didn't respond. I just stared at the screen like it owed me something, an explanation, a correction, a follow-up saying oops, meant mom. Something. Instead, Merritt kept slurping, and I just sat there thinking, why lie about where you are if you don't need to lie? I wanted to ask him. Just blurted out. Hey, weird question. Is my wife hiding something from me? But you can't ask that while someone's eating lentil soup. There's no protocol for that. So I waited. I watched. I smiled when he made a dumb joke about politicians being worse than mold. And when he asked where Clarabelle was, I lied. Helping a co-worker with taxes, I said, my voice thin. I think. He nodded like that made sense. Of course it did. Because it's normal. All of this was supposed to be normal. Except I was chewing on suspicion like it was gristle in the meat. She didn't know he was here. That's what got me. That tiny detail. If she'd just said, out with friends, I wouldn't have blinked. But saying she was helping him, while he was in my kitchen eating soup, that was a choice. And Clarabelle never did things by accident. I didn't say anything that night. I wanted to. God, I wanted to, but my brain couldn't catch up to the feeling in my stomach. That kind of slow, sour twist you get when something is wrong, but there's not enough proof to point at it yet. Like a bad smell you can't find the source of. So I played dumb. I let Merritt finish his soup, and we ended up watching an old detective show on TV. I didn't register a single plot point, just nodded along while my mind did cartwheels in the background. Clarabelle came home around 9:20. She didn't knock, didn't text first, just walked in like she hadn't detonated my sense of reality 3 hours earlier. The first thing I noticed? Her shoes were off. She carried them in one hand and walked barefoot across the hardwood floor like she was floating. Her hair was messy. Not wild, just disrupted. She had on a long beige cardigan I hadn't seen before, or maybe I had. I wasn't exactly cataloging outfits lately. But here's what I do remember. There was dirt on her ankles. Not much. Just specks. But fresh. Damp. She paused when she saw Merritt on the couch. It wasn't shock. Just a slight glitch in her smile. A flicker. Oh, she said, way too casually. Hey, Dad. Didn't know you were coming by tonight. He looked up from the TV and said, brought your man some scones. You still doing someone's taxes? There was this microsecond, this freeze-frame moment, where her whole face tightened. Not in fear, not in panic. In calculation. You could almost hear the gears turning. And then just as quickly, she exhaled a soft laugh and said, yeah, for Carla. From the office. She gets all tangled up in forms. She walked over and kissed me on the cheek. I didn't lean in. I didn't pull away either. I just sat there, still as stone, letting her lies settle into the air between us like smoke from a match. After Merritt left, we pretended everything was normal. She talked about work. I nodded. She asked if I'd watered the plants. I said yes. We brushed our teeth in silence, side by side. And just before bed, she turned to me and said, "You've been quiet tonight." I almost said it. I almost asked about the dirt. About why she lied. About what kind of person sends a fake excuse involving her own father to cover up a few missing hours. But instead, I said, just tired. She nodded, kissed me again, and went to bed. I stayed up for hours, staring at the bedroom ceiling, heart pounding like it was warning me of something I didn't want to admit. Because it wasn't just the lie. It was how comfortable she seemed telling it. The next morning, the house smelled like rosemary and lies. Clarabelle had already left for work by the time I rolled out of bed. She must have tiptoed around like a ghost, leaving only a half-drunk coffee cup on the counter and her scent clinging to the hallway like it didn't know where to go. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at her mug. Lipstick smudged on the rim, barely visible. I touched it with one finger, then pulled my hand back like it burned me. I don't know why I did that. I didn't eat breakfast. I took Milo, our dog, for a walk just to clear my head, but the fresh air made it worse. Every couple on the street started to look suspicious. Every parked car felt like it was watching me. I wasn't even being paranoid. I just wasn't sure what counted as real anymore. If she could lie with that kind of ease, what else had I missed? It got worse around noon. I was fixing a busted upright piano in a retired teacher's sunroom. Dusty floral curtains, porcelain owls everywhere, when I glanced at the street through the window. Across the road, parked under a tree, was a silver sedan I didn't recognize. Engine running. Tinted windows. That wouldn't be strange on its own. I mean, it's a suburban neighborhood, not some spy thriller, but something about it felt off. Then the passenger door cracked open and someone stepped out. Tall, lean, blue hoodie, gray sweatpants, baseball cap pulled low. He didn't walk toward a house. He didn't knock on any doors. He just stood there on the sidewalk, looking at his phone, glancing up the street every few seconds like he was waiting for something. Or someone. I told myself to ignore it. But when I finished the repair and drove back home 2 hours later, I saw the same car. Not in the same spot. This time it was idling 1 block down, tucked between a hedge and a mailbox like it was hiding. I made a U-turn. Drove past again slower. The guy was still in the hoodie, still in the same pose, still scrolling through something like time didn't matter. His face was partly visible now. Pale, sharp jawline. Unshaven, late 30s maybe. He didn't look up as I passed, but I felt it. That quiet electricity you get when you're the subject of someone's attention. That primal hum in your bones that says you're being watched. Back home, I stood in the kitchen and debated calling Clarabelle. What would I even say? Hey babe, random question. Are you being followed by a guy in sweatpants? Or, hiring him to follow me? Just curious. The thought made me sick. That's when I checked our security cam. We have a doorbell cam, nothing fancy, but it stores footage for the last 24 hours. I opened the app, tapped through the timeline, and paused at 9:03 a.m., just after she left. There she was, wearing a long coat and boots, holding her phone. Her bag was over her shoulder, and as she stepped off the porch, she looked left, toward the street, and gave the smallest nod I've ever seen. 2 seconds later, the silver sedan rolled past. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. But she smiled. And that smile was not for me. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I laid there in the dark, listening to the hum of our refrigerator like it was whispering something I couldn't make out. Clarabelle had gone to bed before me again, which was becoming a habit, brushing her teeth at 9:30, slipping under the covers with her phone, turning away from me like I was just another piece of furniture. She said goodnight, but it didn't sound like a real goodbye. It sounded like a habit being performed out of guilt. I watched her from the hallway for maybe 10 seconds longer than I should have. She never noticed. At 2:17 a.m., I got up and watched the doorbell footage again. I must have played that same 14-second clip 20, 30 times. Her stepping off the porch, looking left, the nod, that subtle, crooked smile that didn't belong in any normal morning routine. It wasn't a smile of recognition. It was the kind of smile people give when they're trying to act normal around someone they shouldn't be around. I thought of that silver car and the man in the hoodie, and for some reason, the image of her smiling at it made me feel violated in a way I can't explain. You ever get that cold pressure on your chest, like someone dropped an invisible weight there? That's what it felt like. The kind of dread that isn't sharp or loud, just slow, steady, and heavy. Like your body already knows your life's about to come undone. I didn't confront her the next day, or the day after that, because deep down, I didn't want her to lie again, and I knew she would. I couldn't stomach hearing another version of the truth dressed up in a cardigan and a kiss on the cheek. So I did what any passive, exhausted man does when he's too scared to ask the right questions. I started watching. I started tracking. She'd tell me she was working late, and I'd mark the time. She'd say she was running errands, and I'd check the grocery bags to see if the story matched. I even checked the mileage on her car once while she was in the shower. It had jumped way more than a round trip to the office. But the worst moment came 3 days later, in the middle of a thunderstorm. I was staring out the window, pretending to read, when a bolt of lightning lit up the street like a stage. And in that 1 second, that single electric snapshot, I saw the silver car again, parked across the street. Engine off this time. Just sitting there in the dark, wipers idle, headlights off. It was gone when I blinked, swallowed by the rain, but I know it was there, like a phantom keeping score. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I texted her mom. We're not close. Clarabelle and her mom had a falling out a while back, and I was always caught in the middle, but I needed to know something Clarabelle would never tell me. I kept it casual. Hey, quick question. Has Clarabelle mentioned seeing someone named Carla from work lately? I think I met her once. The response came 20 minutes later. Carla moved to Oregon last month. Why? I stared at the screen like it had just slapped me. My throat tightened. My ears rang. Because if Carla wasn't even in the state, then who was Clarabelle pretending to help with taxes? Who was she lying for? Or worse, who was she covering up? And why was there a car watching our house during thunderstorms? That night, I finally opened a new notes file on my phone and titled it, Things That Don't Add Up. The first entry? She smiled at a man she thought I'd never see. The shift wasn't dramatic. That's the part that kills me. There wasn't one explosive fight or door slammed in the middle of the night moment. No screaming match, no suitcase by the door. Just a quiet unraveling so subtle, I didn't even realize how much had slipped until I looked down one morning and couldn't feel the floor anymore. It started with the little things. Missed calls she didn't mention, phone screens flipped face down, car rides that ended with her texting before stepping out. I told myself it was work stress. I told myself it was seasonal. But even Milo stopped waiting at the door when she came home, and dogs know. The worst thing about being suspicious isn't the suspicion itself. It's the way it mutates your memories. Suddenly, every late night from 2 years ago, every awkward silence from a random Tuesday, every, I'll be back soon, starts to rot under the weight of maybe. That's what my brain had become, a rotting archive of every moment I didn't question at the time. And now it was all I could think about. A week after I texted her mom about Carla, I decided to stop guessing and start digging. I took the day off work and drove down to where Clarabelle said her new office had relocated. A plain gray building off of Brooklyn Avenue, next to a discount shoe outlet and a boarded-up vape shop. I parked across the lot and watched. No sign of her car. I waited almost 2 hours, pacing the sidewalk, nursing a gas station coffee that tasted like dust and glue. Finally, I walked in. The front lobby was barely a lobby, just a single desk with no receptionist and an empty clipboard for visitors. I scanned the directory and found the company name, 3 floors up. I took the stairs, rehearsing a fake story about dropping off a forgotten lunch, something light and believable. But when I reached the suite, the door was locked. The lights inside were off. A sign taped to the glass read, Remote work only until November 15th. It was March. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the sign like it might rearrange itself if I looked hard enough. Remote. Since November. That was 4 months. Which meant every time she said she was driving in, every time she mentioned a coworker catching a cold or office printer jams, all of it had been manufactured. Scripts. Set dressing for a play I wasn't allowed to watch. Back home, I walked through the door like a man who had stepped out of his own skin. She wasn't there. I didn't expect her to be. The silence felt like it belonged to someone else. The kitchen smelled like nothing. I stood at the sink, gripping the counter until my knuckles turned white. Then, without thinking, I opened the top cabinet, the one where we kept the old ceramic tea set she never let me touch. One of the cups was missing. Just one. I looked again, carefully, counting them with deliberate slowness like the numbers might shift if I blinked. But no, there were only 5 instead of 6. The one with the little chip on the handle, the one she always said was too pretty to actually use, was gone. And in its place, on the shelf where it used to sit, was a faint ring of dust. That's when it hit me. She'd taken it with her. Not recently, no. She'd taken it weeks ago. Maybe months. She hadn't been using it. She wanted it with her. Somewhere else. In some other kitchen. On some other shelf. My phone buzzed right then, a message from Clarabelle. Running late. Don't wait for me. I didn't reply. I didn't feel real enough to type. I just sat down on the kitchen floor, Milo curled beside me, and stared at the empty spot in the cabinet like it was a wound. Because that's what it was. Not a broken teacup. A missing one. The next time she lied to me, I wrote it down before she even finished the sentence. She said she was going to meet an old college friend, someone named Daphne, who I'd heard mentioned once, maybe twice, back when we were still painting walls and talking about baby names we'd never use. I nodded like I believed her, but I didn't. Not for a second. She spoke too quickly, smiled too often, and didn't bother checking if I was watching when she slipped on the blue scarf she hadn't worn in years. The one I bought her in Maine. She'd called it a little too loud back then. Now she wore it like it was armor. She left at 4:52 p.m. I waited until 5:17, grabbed my keys, and followed her. It wasn't even hard. Her tail lights were still faintly visible 3 blocks away when I pulled out. I kept my distance, half expecting her to look in the mirror and spot me, but she never did. I stayed far enough back to keep the paranoia high, but close enough that I could follow her through 2 traffic lights and a left turn I didn't expect. She wasn't headed toward the restaurants, or the office district, or even the strip of bars where her friends sometimes met for birthdays. She was going east, toward the edge of town, where the roads got narrower and the streetlights fewer. She pulled into a small lot behind a shuttered florist shop. One of those buildings that still has paint peeling from the windows and faded lettering no one bothered to scrape off. I parked across the street behind a dumpster, engine off, windows cracked. She sat in her car for almost 4 minutes, just looking straight ahead. Then, without checking her phone or touching her hair, 2 things she always did before stepping out anywhere. She grabbed something from the passenger seat and got out. A red umbrella. It wasn't raining. She opened it anyway, shielded herself from nothing, walked slowly around the corner, disappearing down the alley between 2 crumbling brick buildings like she'd done it 100 times before. I didn't follow immediately. I sat there, hand trembling on the door handle, thinking about the last time we'd held hands in public. The last time we'd shared a real laugh. The last time I'd felt like she saw me. I couldn't even put a date on it. All of it had turned into a smear of time, like fogged glass with fingerprints you can't identify anymore. But I needed to see. I left the car and crossed the street. My shoes were too loud on the gravel, my breath too visible in the cold air. As I turned the corner into the alley, I felt my heart lurch up into my throat. There was a door, rusted, unmarked, partially hidden by an overgrown vine and years of neglect. It didn't look like it belonged to any functioning business. No lights above it, no sign, but there was the umbrella, folded, leaning against the doorframe like it was on purpose. Like a signal. I backed away before I could lose my nerve. I got back in the car. Waited. 27 minutes passed. Then she came out. Same pace. Same calm. Picked up the umbrella. Didn't even glance around. Got into her car and drove off like nothing in the world had happened. And I just sat there, hands shaking, wondering how long that door had existed in her life, and how I'd never even known to ask. I told myself I wouldn't go back. I told myself that following her once had been enough, that I'd seen what I needed to see, that anything more would be crossing some invisible moral boundary I couldn't uncross. But the thing is, once you stand in front of a locked door long enough, eventually it stops looking like a door and starts looking like a question. And questions eat at you. They multiply in the dark, feed on your silence, and crawl into your dreams. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think about work, or the dishes piling up in the sink, or Milo whining at the back door. All I could think about was that red umbrella and the way she'd left it leaning there like it belonged. Like she belonged. So I went back. It was the following Thursday, 5 days after I'd first watched her disappear into that alley. I waited until she left for another late work dinner that didn't exist. Then I drove straight to the same cracked parking lot behind the old florist shop. The umbrella wasn't there this time. The alley was darker than before. My footsteps sounded louder. The vines were thicker than I remembered, but the door was still there. Still rusted, still ugly, still pretending to be part of a forgotten city corner. I knocked once. Waited. Nothing. So I turned the handle. It was unlocked. The air on the other side was warm. And scented. Not like food or perfume, but something stranger. Incense, maybe. A sharp, sweet smell that filled my lungs and made the hair on my arms rise. I stepped inside and found myself in a narrow hallway, dimly lit by a row of mismatched table lamps. The walls were covered in fabric, silky, wine-colored drapes that made it feel less like a building and more like a place trying very hard to hide what it really was. I walked slowly, heart punching at my ribs, shoes nearly silent on the rug beneath me. Then I heard voices. Not yelling, not even conversation, just murmurs. Soft, rhythmic, like lullabies being whispered through drywall. I moved toward the sound, each step another betrayal. I should have turned back. I knew it. But there was something about the atmosphere, about the careful way everything had been arranged, that made it impossible to stop. Finally, I reached a curtain at the end of the hallway. A thick one, Gold tassels. Heavy as guilt. I didn't open it all the way. Just a crack. What I saw made my body go still in that deep, primal way people describe right before something awful happens. There were couches. Velvet. Low tables with candles. And maybe 6 or 7 people, sitting, lounging, talking in hushes. All of them dressed too nicely for a place this hidden. One man was reading tarot cards. Another woman was lighting a bundle of herbs. There was laughter, but it was quiet, strained, almost like a rehearsal. And then I saw her, Clarabelle, sitting on a couch, knees tucked beneath her, barefoot, holding a teacup, the one from our kitchen. Her hair was down. She looked younger somehow, freer, like the version of her I hadn't seen in years. She laughed, really laughed, and leaned into the man next to her. A man I didn't recognize. He whispered something in her ear. She smiled in a way I had never earned. And then she kissed him. It wasn't long or sloppy or hungry. It was soft, familiar, practiced, the kind of kiss people give when they don't need to hide anymore. I stepped back. My heel hit the wall. I held my breath, but no one heard. The music from somewhere behind the curtain swelled just enough to cover the sound. I backed down the hallway, heart racing, vision tunneling. I reached the front door and stepped out into the cold, almost expecting to find the world changed. But it hadn't. The street was quiet. The floor's sign was still faded. My car was still parked in the shadow of the lot. I sat behind the wheel for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel anger. What I felt was stranger than that, hollow and weightless, like my identity had been peeled off without anyone noticing. She hadn't just been hiding another man. She had built an entire other world, and I was never invited. It took me 3 days to say anything. Not because I was afraid of a confrontation, not anymore. After seeing what I saw behind that gold curtain, there was nothing left to argue about. No false hope to cling to. But I stayed silent because I wanted to see if she'd tell me first. If she'd crack under the weight of her own double life. If some fragment of the Clarabelle I once knew would surface and confess, not to be forgiven, but just to be honest. She didn't. She came home every night like she always did, humming tuneless songs while she took off her boots, yawning into her palm, asking me how my day went without waiting for the answer. She kept pretending. So did I. And in that mutual performance, I realized something kind of strange. We'd both been lying for a while now. Her, about where she went and who she loved. Me, about still being here. So I made a decision. Not out of revenge. Not to hurt her. But because, for the first time in months, I could feel something in my chest that wasn't fear or grief or suspicion. I felt done. I waited for a Saturday. I knew she'd be gone all afternoon. Another fake yoga class or secret ceremony or whatever euphemism she needed that week. I packed slowly. Not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to do it right. No slamming drawers. No broken dishes. I left the apartment like I'd always wanted to leave something. Gently, with care. I took only what I came with. Clothes, books, tools, Milo. And the garden light. Yeah, that ridiculous solar-powered lamp I bought on impulse during our first year of marriage. The one that only worked on cloudy days. The one she always said we should throw out. I wrapped it in a towel and put it in the passenger seat next to the dog. I didn't leave a note. She'd understand. She might even be relieved. I rented a short-term place on the edge of town, a converted artist loft with exposed brick and terrible insulation. The kind of space that made every cup of coffee taste like starting over. Milo adjusted faster than I did. He slept at my feet that first night like we hadn't just erased 6 years in a single day. I cried once. Quietly. Let it happen. And then I didn't cry again. The next morning, I unpacked the garden light and placed it by the small balcony window. Rain was in the forecast. The sky was already graying. I figured it still wouldn't work. It hadn't in months. But around dusk, as I poured a glass of red wine and watched the city flicker to life below me, I glanced down and saw it glowing. Faint. Steady. Like it had been waiting. And for the first time in forever, I smiled without faking it. Because sometimes the light does come back. Just not where you expect it.